Hello and thank you, Ambassador Moshe Yegar. I am very thankful that you spared time and joined us as a guest. I welcome you here, and I am also thank you, Nancy, Dr. Nancy, for joining us, facilitating us. I'm thankful.
You're welcome.
It's a
Thank
privilege
you.
to be here with you.
The honor is mine, sir. The honor is mine. And Ambassador, this is such a big opportunity for me to interview a experienced person like you, a scholar like you, who spent his whole life in diplomatic efforts and foreign service for Israel. And you are the one who contributed a lot in normalization ties with India.
Well, yes, it was, I think, a fortunate time in 1991. It all happened because Narasimha Rao became the Prime Minister of India and he decided to change a traditional hostile Indian attitude towards Israel. And I was sent to India and had the opportunity to meet with a few senior officials there. And that started the process, which eventually brought a few months later to the establishment or to the normalization of diplomatic relations between our two countries.
That's excellent. And I believe that you know Southeast Asia very well. You were in Malaysia, you spent time in India, you've been in negotiations with Indian diplomats, and you are an author about Southeast Asia, right?
Well, my first post in Southeast Asia was in Burma, today Myanmar.
Yeah.
And there I also found time to do some research on the history of the Muslim communities in plural. There are three major communities in Burma, and a book was published as a result. One of those communities became prominent recently, and these are the Rohingya.
Yeah.
Uh, After some, 2.5 years in Burma, Myanmar, I returned to serve at the head office in Jerusalem, and then I was sent again, unofficially, to Kuala Lumpur. Uh, the purpose was to try and establish diplomatic relations with Malaysia. Abdul Rahman at the time expressed interest in that, and I was sent to see what can be done. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Malaysia was involved then in a confrontation with Indonesia, and there were strong pressures from two Arab countries, especially Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and then from an extreme Muslim party in Malaysia itself, PAP, it was called, against establishing relations with Israel. So after a year and a quarter approximately, I left and went and received other assignments in the Foreign Office. The negotiations with India and China, the whole change of Israel's situation in Asia came much later.
That's right. And nowadays we are hearing about the neighboring country, Indonesia, neighboring with Malaysia, that Indonesia will be the next country to normalize its ties with Israel.
I hope so. I don't really know, but some kind of contacts with Indonesia we had all along. Indonesia traditionally was more moderate toward Israel and more welcoming, but it did not come to establishing diplomatic relations. Here and there, I hear I'm now out of touch. I'm I'm retired, but here and there one hears about contacts with Indonesia. There were official visits even of prime ministers, but it did not reach the stage of complete normalization. I hope it will happen sooner or later.
What about Pakistan, Ambassador?
Here the picture is a little bit gloomy. Pakistan was hostile to Israel right from the beginning. Most prominent Pakistani diplomat and leader led anti-Israeli campaigns. His name is familiar, I guess, Sir Zafrullah Khan.
Yeah.
Also, although he came once on a visit to Israel soon after our independence, and one has to remember Pakistan and Israel are more or less the same age.
Yeah.
Pakistan achieved her independence a few months earlier than Israel, but it showed and continues to show uh, hostile attitudes to Israel. I never understood why, except one reason, and that was Muslim solidarity with some of our Arab neighbors. Uh, I never thought it necessary. Yet you see, I'll repeat what I said. I remember more or less my conversation with Mr. Akram Zaki. Akram Zaki was, at the time I'm talking about, it was December 1992. I happened to meet him just by accident in Tokyo. During that month, he led a Pakistani mission to Tokyo, and I was part of an Israeli mission that visited Tokyo in those days when we discovered by accident that we stayed the same hotel. I sent I sent him a message that I would like to meet him, and he invited me after midnight to come to his room. I came to his room and we had a very interesting conversation. Uh, what I told him was very simple. Pakistan is doing very well without establishing relations with Israel. So is Israel. We manage very well without Pakistan, but it's a pity because if we did have relations, uh, both countries could have benefited very well in many areas. So it's useless. There is no conflict between Pakistan and Israel, and why the hostility? It has no real purpose. We knew the reasons. Pakistani government or governments needed Arab support in the campaign against India on the question of Kashmir. We were told those things. We know it. We knew it. But I remember that I told Akram Zaki and many other Israelis who happened to meet Pakistanis said we understand this reason, but you don't get Arab support. Very often the Arabs support India, so why the hostility toward Israel? You don't benefit by it, and you are not compensated by the Arabs. But it didn't change. I guess that there is some opposition from certain Islamic quarters in Pakistan itself against establishing relations with Israel. I always thought that it was not necessary and it could be overcome. Uh, You know, you know, you know it better than many others. There are many unfavorable references to the Jewish people in the Holy Quran. But there is also a passage that could be used by people of goodwill in order to justify and explain establishing relations with Israel. I refer to Surah Al-Ma'idah, Ayah 23, I think, that the right kind of explanation, positive explanation, tafsir, could have supplied the necessary justification for recognizing Israel or the right of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. I believe that religious leaders could contribute here something positive and maybe thus advance relations between Pakistan and Israel, of which both countries could have benefited very much.
Hmm. That's right. That's right, Ambassador. And you are talking about the era of early 90s. In 1991, Narasimha Rao wanted to change the status quo. And in 1992, you met Akram Zaki. In that time, in that period of time, there was Cold War just ended in Afghanistan. And we always hear about the stories of close cooperation between Pakistan and America in Afghanistan, and among Pakistan, America, and Israel in Afghanistan.
I find it difficult to hear.
I was asking about the close cooperation between America, Israel, and Pakistan in Afghanistan during Cold War.
Not, I'm afraid I can't comment on that. I'm unacquainted with that situation. We did know that Pakistan enjoyed at the time very good relations with the United States. So did Israel. But to the best of my knowledge, it did not affect Pakistan-Israel relations, except one case that I can remember. In 1991, a group of Islamic organization in Kashmir, the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, attacked a group of Israeli tourists in Srinagar, and the UN personnel there did not want to help. I was sent to India to try and rescue one of the boys who was caught by the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front. This is a story by itself, and time won't permit to repeat everything that happened there. But one of the aspects was that at our request, we know that the United States government interfered in Islamabad and asked the Pakistani government to get in touch with the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front in order to release the captive. And it was done. And the fact was that after a few days, I got this boy and sent him back to Israel.
Hmm. So, these stories about buying weapons from Israel to supply them to Mujahideen in Afghanistan during Cold War to fight against Russia, is it true or just stories out of stories?
I'm sure I'm not acquainted with everything that happened in those days, but knowing the situation as it happened to be, I doubt if it's true I would rather say it's baseless.
Okay. And how you see the future of Israel and Iran conflict relation, or what is the future between the two countries?
Gloomy.
Gloomy.
It's an unhappy situation. As
Hmm.
far as we are concerned, the present regime in Iran is extremely hostile.
Hmm.
Iran today, the most hostile enemy we have, and we always had enough enemies, more than we needed.
Hmm.
Uh, Iran is the worst of them all. I'm afraid that as long as there is no change of regime in Iran, I can't see a better prospect.
An ambassador, where we see the situation, from where we find Iran as an insurance policy of Israel, and we see Israel as an insurance policy for Iran.
No, I didn't follow. Please, can you repeat here?
I said that from where we see the situation, we find that Iran is an insurance policy for Israel,
In what
and,
sense?
and Israel is an insurance policy for Iran.
In what sense? I'm not sure I
Like
understand.
Irani regime always present Israel as a bigger threat in front of their nation, and convince them that, look, we are protecting you from Israel, and this is the justification for us to be in power. And same as the Arab countries are coming closer with Israel because of Iranian threats. So to somehow this hate bond is paying both sides in a good way.
No, I'm afraid it's stretching it a bit
Hmm.
too far. Uh, there is there are some positive changes between Israel and some Arab countries, not all of them yet. I hope the others will also come forward in due course. But the with Iran, I'm afraid I can't say anything better than I already said it. Iran is an open enemy.
Yeah.
Fact is that the leaders of Iran don't hide their intentions. They talk frankly and openly
Hmm.
about their desire to destroy Israel. Israel is the only country in the world which is threatened by a destruction. And
Hmm.
we, the Jewish people, we have some experience with destruction.
Hmm.
During Second World War, when one third of our people, almost all of Jewry in Europe, was murdered that way.
Hmm.
I myself have no doubt that if the Iranians will have the opportunity, they will do to us exactly what the Germans did to us during Second World War. The only difference was that the Jews of Europe were defenseless and the Jews of Israel know how to defend themselves and fight for their lives. If the Iranians will try, and they are trying all the time, they have bases in
Hmm.
Syria, and they are trying all kinds of methods and systems to harm Israel. The only difference is that today we can fight back and we'll do it if threatened.
Hmm. I agree with you that, but with an addition that Israel is not the only country which has the threat of destruction. Pakistan and Israel are both in same situation, that we both face the challenge of destruction. our enemy always talk about Akhand Bharat. So Akhand Bharat, a complete India, where there will be no Pakistan anymore. And same situation with, and f- for this, like, I would like to utilize this very moment to condemn what the Jewish people have gone through in Germany. That Holocaust is condemnable. We all uh, feel the pain, and we cannot ignore uh, the pain and the grief of Jewish community. And I am a person who always believe in the right of life for everyone. Destruction is a word which I never go for or stand with. So every single human being on earth has an equal right to live peacefully. So I pray for the peaceful life of my countrymen, and same for your countrymen, and same for the whole human being.
Thank you. I'm in full agreement with you.
Thank you. And Ambassador, how you see the normalization process with Saudi Arabia? There are news that it is on a very fast track, just matter of disclosure.
I understand that the United States is trying to advance relations or improve them in some way or other, to improve your relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Everyone knows that Iran is a threat, grave threat to Saudi Arabia, not only to Israel. Iran is a grave threat to all its neighbors. This is the nature of the aggressive regime that controls that country. But I understand that Saudi Arabia must face some difficulties in a decision to normalize relations with Israel. Again, because of Islamic religious theological reasons. They also could refer to the same surah and ayah in the Holy Quran that I refer to,
Yeah.
and find the right way out of the present unnecessary crisis. There is no real conflict between Saudi Arabia and Israel. We are not real enemies. We did not choose hostility with Saudi Arabia. It was their decision, and it's up to them to change it and improve relations, which I think will be very, very welcomed in Israel. Saudi Arabia is the most important country. It's a big country. It's an important country, and I think there is nothing we would have liked more than normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia, as it happened recently with some of the Gulf countries. Um, as we hope it's going to happen with Sudan, as it happened years ago with Egypt and with Jordan. Things can be improved with Saudi Arabia too. The Trump administration, the United States, did important things in that direction. I don't know what will be the attitude of the future administration in Washington. I hope that they will continue in their efforts to bring peace to the Middle East. It serves the purposes of everybody.
Hmm.
The less the conflicts in the Middle East, the better for all countries involved.
Hmm. And that will open not only a door of peace and opportunity for Israel and Saudi Arabia, but for the whole world.
Exactly.
Ambassador, how challenging was handling India and China on a same time when both were entering in the normalization phase?
Apart from the fact that it was an extremely interesting experience
Mm,
personally, I was fortunate to find myself accidentally in the midst of it all.
mm,
I was more involved with the advancement of relation with India than with China, but to a certain degree, I was participant in the efforts towards China too. Uh, it was amusing in the sense that we we were very curious in Israel to watch the behavior of these two giant countries.
mm,
How
mm,
is China behaving towards once it decided to
mm,
normalize the relation with Israel? China too was very hostile for decades.
mm,
And how is India behaving? Uh, China's attitude was completely different. Once they decided that it's time to normalize the relation with Israel, they went straight forward. They decided on the pace. They did it gradually by stages. And once we understood, or once we got the key to their diplomatic behavior, we behaved accordingly and cooperated with them, and things moved as they did.
mm,
The Indians always lagged behind. They were reluctant. They were afraid. There was a fear, maybe a
mm,
genuine fear, in India. What will be the Arab reaction
mm,
to their changing their attitude toward Israel? What will be the attitude of the Muslim minority, which is a giant minority in India, to such a positive move?
mm,
But they didn't want to lag behind China for too long or too much. At the
mm,
time, if you remember, the Madrid conference was convened, and Israel put a condition. We were one country, representing one partner of the discussions there, the diplomatic discussions. Against us was standing a huge block of so many other countries, but we were 50% of the negotiations.
mm,
And our condition was that no country that has no relation with Israel will be permitted to participate in the conference. And this condition of ours had to be accepted, because without that, there would have been no Israel. Without
mm,
Israel in the conference, there would have been no conference.
mm,
And India at that time wanted to participate too, and they sent feelers whether asking if Israel will agree to their participation. It was a matter of national prestige to be in Madrid. Not that it helped much the diplomatic process itself, but it was important for national dignity to be there, to be present. China could be present, and India felt that she is also one of the biggest countries in the world. She wants to be there.
mm,
And we told them, I remember that I was approached myself by an unofficial Indian representative. And I told him, if there will be no diplomatic relations with Israel, you will not be in Madrid.
mm,
Uh, it was not very often in our history that Israel could put conditions. Being a small country, lonely country, Israel was in no position to put conditions. And here, all
mm,
of a sudden, we found ourselves that we can put a condition, and it must be accepted. And that's exactly what happened. Uh, that the Indians also had another problem. Narasimha Rao was an
mm,
open-minded person. He decided that he must do something to improve India's economic situation, which was very bad at that
mm,
time. I visited India several times, and I could see scenes in the streets that you could hardly see in other countries.
mm,
You don't see it anymore, by the way,
mm,
in India today. Although still there is a long way to go, but the change was tremendous. And the
mm,
Indian government requested huge loans in the United States at the time, millions of dollars that Narasimha Rao requested, and he flew to the United States for that purpose. And
mm,
then he heard from his American partners that their foreign policy uh, is uh, is not exactly what Americans believe it should be. That India should behave equally, honestly, justly, fairly with Israel as it expects to be treated by others.
mm,
And Narasimha Rao, I think, being a very intelligent person, got the message. This also
mm.
contributed to change.
That's right. The relations with China are improving day by day, and you improved it day by day, and now you are very great partners in trade and technology. So the friendship of Pakistan with China and the relation of Israel with China, is it effective to normalize relations between Pakistan and Israel?
Not so far, as far as I know.
Hmm,
I'm not sure that China feels comfortable or that she is interested in serving as a go-between between uh, Israel and Pakistan. If China would have decided to do it, it would have been a great contribution.
hmm.
Besides, I don't believe that Pakistan needs China to be told what is good for her.
That's right.
Pakistan could make the decisions herself. The government of Pakistan knows
Hmm,
what's good for Pakistan, what not. I am also not going to give advices to the Pakistani government.
hmm,
The only thing I could do is repeat what was said in those
hmm,
days. There is no reason for conflict. There is no conflict between Pakistan and Israel. There is hostility, unnecessary hostility from one side only, not from our side. And I think that Pakistan doesn't need the Chinese to tell them that
yeah,
relations with Israel could be fruitful.
that's right. I agree with this. And Ambassador, my last part of the podcast is about, you are not recommending anything to the government of Pakistan, but with your experience, for people of both the countries, Pakistan and Israel, who are willing to see a peaceful future uh, between both the countries, what will be your recommendations for those peace seekers, peace lovers, and people who want to see the normalization taking place? How should, how they should act, and how they should proceed, and how they should participate in the process?
Well, in Israel, I believe that the Israeli public, without exception, will welcome very much relation with Pakistan. Knowing my people, I believe that one of the first results will be that many thousands of Israelis will buy tickets and fly immediately to Pakistan to see what kind of a country it is,
Hmm.
and you will suffer from an influx of Israeli tourists.
Hmm.
Uh, the number of tourists that Israel is sending abroad to every corner of the world every year is tremendous, and in some people don't believe that we are so few in numbers. If we have so many tourists, how can one explain that so many Israelis are traveling around the world? So
Hmm.
Pakistan will immediately have many Israeli curious tourists who want to see the country.
Hmm.
Uh, I believe that tourists from Pakistan will be very welcomed in Israel. They have good religious reason to visit
Yeah.
the mosques in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Al-Aqsa is visited by many Muslims. Many Indonesians, by the way, come to Israel as tourists and
Hmm.
are accepted. They enter without any difficulty. And so is true with other Muslims from countries that don't have relation with Israel. Many Muslims from Africa,
Hmm.
different African countries are coming all the time. But how can it be advanced? This is a great question. Uh, I believe that in the case of Pakistan, really not knowing very well the situation, but just as a guess or based on what happened in other countries, that intellectual leaders in Pakistan, and maybe first and foremost, religious leaders in Pakistan, could contribute a great deal in convincing the Pakistani government to change its attitude,
Hmm.
explaining what I said, and maybe advancing other better arguments than mine,
Hmm.
that not only there is no harm in establishing relations with Israel, but it might serve a good purpose. Uh, we would like to see Israeli, Pakistani presence in Israel uh, in a way of an embassy,
Hmm.
economic missions, cultural missions, intellectual missions. We could develop a cooperation in various technological fields. I mean, things that happen today all over the world. No reason, there is no reason not to do it with Pakistan.
Hmm.
Pakistan is a highly advanced country.
Hmm.
Pakistan proved it by developing its nuclear capability, among other things. So, this is a country that many Israelis would have liked to cooperate with.
Hmm.
And the problem is, how can one convince a government?
Hmm.
Uh, all governments around the world are not easy to be convinced. There's nothing special about the government of Pakistan or the government of Israel. But when uh, a proper kind of approach will be advanced by Pakistani elite, by Pakistani intelligentsia, by Pakistani religious leaders. And who knows, Pierre, you might, I believe, contribute a great deal yourself, you with your colleagues and others, and contribute here something of extreme importance. I hope it happens.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really appreciate and I'm really thankful that you have given us time. And I will thank you, Dr. Nancy, for being with us,
Thank you.
joining us
Thank
all
you.
the time. And you continued typing, and we were hearing
Thank you.
the sound of your typing. And Ambassador Moshe, I am really thankful. Hope to see you soon. I am planning to visit Israel as soon as this pandemic will go off and flights will start operating and people are start traveling from one country to second country. The day the pandemic will turn down, I will be flying for Israel.
Pierre Mudar Shah, it was a privilege and a pleasure to be interviewed by you. I did the little best I could to explain our position, and I hope that this conversation of ours will contribute something. There is an element of time. In my advanced age, it's better to hasten things so that I'll have the opportunity to enjoy the fruits of a better future soon. Thank you very, very much for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And goodbye.
Goodbye. Nancy.